Hello, everybody. Welcome to this final episode of a three-part series on monitoring as code. Today, we're going to focus on tooling and implementation. So there's a number of topics underneath this. We're going to dig into doing some introductions, both of ourselves and our respective companies. Then we're going to have some conversations around the best way to select tooling. Today is going to be heavy around the monitoring as code as usual. But many of these problems and the skills you'll learn over the course of this next session are going to be transferable. They're going to apply to both monitoring as code scenarios, but also general tool selection scenarios, some of the capabilities you want to look for, some of the problems you might face, that kind of thing. Going to be very practical heavy this time as well. So less talking, more showing is the goal for this session. So I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Chris Kearney, the Director of Developer Relations here at Coralogix. My background, I was an SRE and a software engineer for 10 years, principal engineer and leadership for some of that as well. Now I'm in developer advocacy with Coralogix, and I'm responsible for speaking with engineers, finding out what problems engineers are facing, and generally evangelizing observability practices that I believe are beneficial and are going to have some positive impact on both our customers and potential users as well. Jonathan?
Oh, awesome. Good to meet you again, Chris, for the third and final time. I hope I never see you again. My name is Jonathan Canales. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Checkly. Prior to coming here, I, boot camp grad, UX design, software development, that sort of thing. Got my first position building a bunch of custom web applications that had no testing. I moved to Cyprus, worked at Cyprus for a while on the customer success side of things, right? So working with a lot of enterprise customers, finding out what the downsides of testing were with that particular framework. And then I came over to Checkly, right? Checkly relies on Playwright underneath the hood to do things like multi-step API checks, browser-based checks, and it does a really great job of uniting testing and monitoring. So I'm here now. I get to talk with customers and prospects and users all the time that are utilizing Playwright, thinking about synthetic monitoring, thinking about how they can unite more of their overall development lifecycle using one tool and adopting monitoring as code, of course.
Amazing. So just some ground rules before we get stuck into this. One, candid conversation is always encouraged, as you just saw with Jonathan's wish to never see me again. That hurt, by the way. Questions just all the way through. Don't worry about waiting for prompts or anything like that. Just ask questions as much as possible using the Q&A feature. That way we can track it really easily. So let's get started with an overview of Checkly. I was going to give this, but I feel like Jonathan may be slightly more qualified to do it. So Jonathan, quick overview of Checkly.
Only slightly. Yeah. So Checkly, right, is a developer-first synthetic monitoring platform that's built for you to be able to code, test, and deploy synthetic monitors at scale. And so what does that mean? If you are now just joining us, this is the third time I've explained it, and I'll explain it forever into the future. What that means is that you can do things like single-step, multi-step API checks, browser-based flows. So if you have a login flow, a payment flow, a super secret flow that only very special users can do, Checkly allows you to do that all by using Playwright Test. In addition to that, we allow you to do things like heartbeat checks, so cron job monitoring, Kubernetes clusters, etc. So if you have regular jobs that are running and you want to know, hey, did this job actually run or did it fail? And you don't want to wait to pour through some logs, we help you do that. Right? And this is all done through monitoring as code. You can use the UI, you can do a ClickOps sort of approach for these types of things, but we actually highly recommend you don't. That's the whole reason why we're doing this series of webinars, right? We're talking about monitoring as code. Use code, get it in version control. Let's do something better this time around, right? So all this does, right? We are creating alerts, we're creating status pages, we're doing visual comparison. We're sending you these alerts. We're hitting you on all these different channels. This creates a bunch of data, right? And so what we're actually be looking at today with Chris is what happens with that data that all these synthetic monitors are creating and how they're used. And so, Chris, if you want to talk about Coralogix, might be a great.
I'd be glad to. It's my favorite topic in the whole world. Okay, Coralogix. Coralogix is a full stack observability platform. We process logs, metrics, traces. We also have a security offering as well. These on the screen that you can see, bunch of different features that we offer. Some of the key things, just some headlines quickly. Number one is that customers that move from other observability platforms, SaaS-based observability platforms, typically see between a 40 and a 70% cost saving when they engage with our what's called a TCO optimizer, which enables you to do use case driven analysis of your data, especially your logs and your traces, the most expensive components. We also have a collection of really amazing features, especially around tight integrations to OpenTelemetry, machine learning, much more, even generative AI now as well. Super cool. So yeah, it's just a quick one of Coralogix. So we're going to get started with the first topic, and really this slide is going to form the bulk of the theory portion of today's webinar. Really, we're giving you an assessment, giving you some criteria and some insight into good criteria for selection. Why is this really important? Using monitoring as code is really important, obviously for scalability, for consistent deployment, minimizing drift, and so on. But if you choose the wrong tools, or if you don't choose the tools that quite match what you need, you can use any process you want. It's still not going to work for you. And so while monitoring as code is the approach that's going to get you there, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how to effectively pick the tools that you need to solve the problem. So Jonathan was the author of this slide, and it's beautiful. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So Jonathan, why don't you get us kicked off with some of these criteria, and we can get started.
Absolutely. Right. So I'll hit a few of these. And of course, Chris, you're welcome to jump in however you like. At the top of the list, right, criteria for me and for the folks that I typically work with is always about ease of use and cost effectiveness, right? So even if you have a monitoring as code tool in place, does that necessarily mean it's the best tool, that it's better than your current implementation? And I think ease of use may be something that we kind of gloss over sometimes, but it's important that anyone on your team can easily and readily start understanding what you're doing with your code, right? At least before you make it super complex later on, as you kind of make your solution more fit your actual your actual workflow. So ease of use, you definitely want people to be able to use the tool, trial it themselves, get an understanding for how things work. Before you say, hey team, we're going to buy this tool, this is what we're moving to, good luck figuring it out, the docs are terrible. You want to make sure that all of these sorts of things are, I like making Chris laugh, so that's what I'm in it for. That's what you want first and foremost. Cost effectiveness for the folks that we're typically working with, I think, is also very closely matched, right? It's great if you have a tool that's easy to use, it's so nice and shiny, it's good, it seems like it's going to solve all our problems. Well, if the price point is way out of budget, or it doesn't line up with, what you're currently paying for maybe not a monitoring as code tool, this is something to talk about. I'm going to actually take a quick aside here. What you see on the right in this beautiful slide I put together is actually a sheet that compares, it's a Google sheet that I'll share with y'all after this webinar, that allows you to compare tools against one another for like by like feature sets. And then what it does is it allows you to assign criticality to different features, and then you come up with a score, right? So when you're thinking about these tools and you're looking at these different criteria and you're thinking about the features that really matter to you, right? It's important that you also take your feelings out of it and you look directly at, hey, feature by feature, based on what's actually important to my team, my organization, is this a much better tool? Is the juice going to be worth the squeeze in any future migration, right? And it's up to you and your organization to determine what that means. So while Chris and I are here talking about Checkly and Coralogix, being able to look at things this way from this point of view is what's best for your organization. And we both believe that strongly. Chris, am I talking for you here? Or are we on the same page?
Oh, we're same page, same line, beautiful, same paragraph. I think the only thing I would add is people often will treat ease of use as a what they'll call like a soft requirement. So it's like, okay, this UI is a little bit janky, but it costs a tenth, so we'll make the sacrifice. The cost of poor ease of use isn't slow work or mistakes. The cost is instilling really bad habits in your team. That's like the really, really bad stuff, because what's going to happen is, okay, this thing's horrible to use. You are incentivizing people to use other avenues with poor ease of use. So, and by the way, ease of use doesn't mean a flashy UI. It doesn't mean a beautiful animations. What it means is that everybody in your team instinctively understands how to use this thing, or they have documentation that helps to fill in the gaps. If you haven't got that, then you're fighting an uphill battle from day one to instill decent practices in your team. And you then imagine, we talked last time about the model of when you get to scale. Imagine that at scale. So with 10 people, it's difficult. With 100 people, it's really hard. With 1,000 people, it's just not going to happen. You're going to be finding it very, very difficult to push 1,000 people in the same direction when that direction is a horrible uphill climb. No one volunteers for the uphill climb. So ease of use is essential for minimizing drift, minimizing rework, and minimizing the amount of straying away from the golden path that you want to lay out. That's really important monitoring as code flow. That applies to both your code, the code interfaces, and the user interface as well.
I think this touches on exactly what your practical example is going to be about later in this webinar, right? Customizable and extensible. So without a solution being easy to use or easy to implement, it seems like you would not even be able to get to the point where it's customizable and extensible, because you're so busy crafting the solution just to work with what basic requirements you already have.
Yep, indeed. And speaking of customizable and extensible, like this is something that's really overlooked constantly. So people think about performance, I think about, sometimes they think about ease of use, they take it as seriously as they should. They definitely think about cost. Cost always comes up. It's like question number one or question number two. Extensibility is crucial for a simple reason, okay? You will almost never just have one tool. Right? It never really happens. It's very, very rare that one company can unify around a single platform or a single tool. What happens is you tend to have what's called a wheel and spoke pattern. So you have the wheel, which is a big tool, a big platform that you use. In days gone by, that might have been something like Oracle. These days, it might be a cloud platform like AWS, for example. And then you have a spoke, which is a series of tools that sit around that main hub. And what's really important is that it's really easy to talk between your wheels and your spokes and in between the spokes as well. So if you have 10 small tools, if none of them can talk to each other, the best benefit you can hope for is the feature that's contained within that small tool. But when you bring tools together extensively, you can actually create these really nice marriages of really powerful insight that come from multiple different disparate data sources, all rendering the same, all rendering information to a single place. So that's the magic of extensibility, is that you can extend your platform in new and interesting ways, and you're never backed into a corner. If you need a new capability, you can marry up different tools to make that work. If you don't have that capability, you either buy a new tool, therefore exacerbating tool sprawl, making your life more difficult, or you say it's not possible, at which point you've hit a brick wall and it's very, very difficult to recover from that. So extensibility is something that's always overlooked. What does that look like? APIs, generic integrations that take any webhooks, JSON transformations, that kind of thing. Look for that in some of the tools, because if they don't have it, it's going to be very, very difficult to connect to multiple different platforms. So just relying on those native connections can be a little bit risky. Jonathan, is there anything about the sort of bottom half of this list around scalability, community, that kind of thing that you really want to jump out at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things there, right? It's obviously integration with version control. I think every single webinar we've done in this series so far, we've talked about making sure that it's integrated with version control. You're running all of these changes through CI/CD. You're getting away from using things in the UI as soon as possible, right? You want to make sure that you're tracking all your changes, and you want to make sure that the tools that you select are built for purpose, right? If it's a monitoring as code tool, table stakes, like bare minimum requirements are that it's working within your version control. If it's not, then I don't know if I'd even count it as monitoring as code, right? In addition to that, I think the last point here, and there's plenty of good things we could talk about in the middle of this, but like Chris said at the beginning, we're going to mainly make this practical example heavy today. It's composable and configurable for me, right? I think sometimes these things can be easily confused. I think, the configurability of a tool means exactly what it sounds like. So when I set up a check and I want to run at this frequency, and I want it to be tied to these alert channels, I want it to, be activated, deactivated, muted, etc. I need to be able to set all those things in code on the fly and be able to update them when I want to, right? That's really important for me. That's really important for folks that we talk to every day. But composable, I think, is perfectly aligned with that, and that these things are two sides of the same coin, essentially, right? You want your tool to be able to do something like, hey, not only can I set all these configurations, but I want to be able to dynamically set those configurations. I want to be able to dynamically create these changes without a human having to intervene every time it's Tuesday and this check needs to be muted, right? We need to be able to do something there that makes it a lot more dynamic and easy for us to use, and again is built for purpose because we've created this. We're using a customizable and extensible tool. It's integrated throughout our entire workflow. It's easy to use and easy for us to understand, so we can do this work instead of struggling to use a solution that's maybe not built for us to effectively use in our workflow. Any thoughts there, Chris?
Yeah, man. I think one thing that I really want to call out from that list is the community and vendor support thing. And just from that list, it's there's nothing quite like having a problem with a tool, going online and finding someone had the exact same problem and here's the solution for it. It's like the Stack Overflow effect. So looking at the adoption of a tool is cool. Looking at the market size of a tool is a good indication, but there's no guarantee that there's a community been built around it. There's a distinction between a large user base and a community of users. And a community of users only comes when the vendor makes an effort to create that. That takes the form of things like Reddit groups or Slack channels or whatever is necessary to sort of have people communicating about the product. Twitter is another good example as well. And Stack Overflow groups as well are a nice addition. What's really, really essential is that there are multiple avenues for you to go from problem to solution, whether that's great documentation, video content, or indeed Slack channels, Reddit channels, where you can ask the question directly and someone can help you. This doesn't exist for every tool, and I don't think it's absolutely essential. It's just cool. It's nice to have. It's very comforting to know that there are lots of people and they may face some of the same problems that you're facing. So super essential there. And the other one I wanted to talk about was the reporting capabilities. So what's going to happen as you adopt a tool more and more is naturally either the cost of that tool will increase if it's usage-based pricing, or any small problems that exist or are initially faced when you use a tool will exacerbate. So if there's a tiny little detail that your team doesn't like and 10 engineers are using it, it's a minor problem. If 1,000 engineers are using it, that tiny detail can become a big problem. So reporting capabilities are important for two aspects. One is cost management and tracking, but the other one is how are people actually using this thing? Is it actually working? Are they using it in an efficient way? How much time a day do they spend using it? Are there any drop-offs? That kind of thing. So look for tools that give you an insight and audit, if you like, of how people are actually using it and what's actually going on the platform. That will give you an idea of adoption. It will also give you an idea of value for money, an ROI. Okay, if people are misusing this tool all the time, they may not necessarily be getting the value for your license. So you'll notice here that some of these are about how to select the right tool, and some of these are really about how to know you've made the right selection once you've done it. And so as much as you can plan up front, we've definitely included criteria here for how to be on top of those changes as they come as well. Yeah, that's me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that makes sense. If you want to move to the next slide, right?
Sure.
So go for it.
I was going to say, so we intentionally didn't want to spend much time on theory this session. It's the last one. We want to show you as much as we can. So we're going to focus heavily on two elements. So configurable and composable versus customizable and extensible. And these are practical examples. Jonathan, I believe you're going first. Is that right? Yep. Yeah. So Jonathan's going to kick us off. If you tell us a little bit about which side you're on and what these different words mean. And I love a bit of adversary. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think we probably queued it up pretty good in this last slide we were just covering. I'm doing configurability and composability, right? To me, with the folks that I work with, the ability to configure your tool again on the fly and have something that's composable to exactly what your requirements are is extremely important, right? If you have thousands of sites that all kind of have a similar workflow, et cetera, it's would probably be pretty easy for you to implement something that would get you coverage for all those sites in a pretty short amount of time with some, early on work. So that'll be the example that I dive into. Chris, what are you covering?
So I'm having a look at how the whole is often greater than the sum of the parts. So I talked before about having this wheel and spoke pattern of a central hub that's really important, a centralized tool, then lots of smaller tools that help out. I'm going to talk about what happens when you connect lots of those smaller tools together and the benefits you can get, and just some examples using Checkly and Coralogix to give you an idea of what to look for and why you should definitely be hunting for this composable quality in many of the tools that you adopt. So, Jonathan, I think I'll let you kick off your screen share, if that's okay.
Cool. Absolutely. Here we go.
It's taking over. Good.
Awesome. So we actually looked at this project, I think, session 1, right? But because we were short on time, we didn't get to look at it very deeply. Actually, it was session 2. But what you're looking at right now, right, is a simple project config. What you're seeing here, what I've highlighted very rudely, what you're seeing here, and now, of course, we're seeing these other stuff. What you're seeing here is actually all you need to run your checks, right? It's a frequency, it's the locations. I'm passing some tags. Technically, I don't need that, but I'm passing them anyway. I'm passing some tags. I'm passing a runtime for those checks to reference if I'm pulling in additional packages, and I'm finding where those checks are running from. And so what this means is that we've configured this project at a global project level, right? But in the example that we're actually working from today, again, we're using this array of objects that represents multiple apps. And these apps have different browser checks and different API checks pointing to different endpoints, right? And again, what you're seeing here is we're passing a configuration, right? Activated true, the method that this route is visiting, the frequency it should be running at for this particular check, whether or not there's a setup script, what assertions we're passing it, what the name will be, right? So here, I think I'm highlighting the configurability portion of things. And so now let's look at what composability means in relation to configurability, right? And that could be something like this. So because I'm working through that array of objects, I also know that I want to group those different apps. That way, maybe the apps are being controlled differently based on the parameters that I'm getting from that configuration object, right? And so what you can see here is that in the naming convention, I'm formatting in a specific way so it can be read by Checkly. I'm passing in a different frequency. I'm passing in a different location than the global locations, right? I'm passing in alert channels here. With this sort of more focused configurability, I'm able to get more specific about what I want, how I want these checks to run. But again, with composability is how I'm able to reference these different, essentially, these different constructs. So Checkly relies on constructs in the CLI, and to some degree, it's kind of similar in Terraform. But it allows you to do things like this, where I can make all of my resources on the fly just by reading through some sort of configuration object that you can create however you want, right? Again, with dashboards, we're reading this information from that JSON list of JSON objects, and then we're passing in additional configuration here, like a composable configuration. Like, do we want it to be private? Yeah, we want it to be private. Could I have just read that from the configuration object to begin with? Absolutely, right? There's nothing that keeps me from refining that further and further and further the more that I use the solution. So when we talk about ease of use, when we talk about configurability and composability, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm referencing, right? Is that we just keep making it easier for you to use the solution in whatever way works for you, right? Here you can see at the check level, I'm actually passing the activated attribute, the frequency attribute. I could inherit it from the group. I could inherit it from the project level, Or I can choose to sort of dynamically, I can choose to sort of dynamically assign those sorts of attributes as I want, because this tool is configurable and composable, right? And I've shown you all this before, but I'll do it again because I love doing this. This is one of my favorite things. It really is. I know I sound like a real cheeseball talking about it, but anytime I do this npx checkly test dash record, it puts a smile on my face because I'm so used to running end-to-end tests on my machine and them taking forever. So it's always wild to me to see just so many tests run so fast, because it's using Checkly's infrastructure when we use that test record command, and then immediately I get that feedback again, which is great. But the real thing that I'm trying to drive home here is that I can just immediately deploy all of these different resources. And I also just love doing this because it just happens in an instant, right? But I think the interesting thing for us is that, and it's something that we talked about earlier, it's that, so we're running all of these checks, we're creating all of this data, right? And it's going somewhere. It has to go somewhere. And our partners at Coralogix, they've actually developed some like really cool dashboards where, as we are doing these synthetic monitoring, right, as we're executing these synthetic monitors against your applications, it actually, Chris is going to show you. I don't need to ruin the surprise. It's really, really cool. I'll hand the reins over to you unless you have any questions for me, Chris, about what we've just seen here.
Nope, all good. I thought it's really, really interesting. When you talk about the composability of configuration, is there a limit to that, do you think? Where like, when you're joining together lots and lots of different things, would you advise like an upper bound to that where you kind of should stop? Or is it just like go nuts? Are you a big fan?
Oh man. Oh, that's such a good question. I think, right, as we've talked about all of this regarding monitoring as code, right? I think the underlying theme for a lot of what we've shared here is it has to be practical. It has to be practical for your organization. I'm a fan of, I'm a solutions engineer, so I like solving puzzles. I like seeing a big problem and then trying to make it something that we can solve away by doing a setup like this, right? So for me, it's like, this may seem complicated or complex to some degree, but in reality, right, like, I'm using what Checkly has provided. These constructs are literally just attributes I can give to the API check in general. They're attributes I can give to a project, to an alert channel, to a dashboard, to a maintenance window. So when I think about it, like, there already is an upper bounds of sorts. I mean, there's an infinity amount of variables I can introduce here. But what happens though is, let's actually do something where this will just break, maybe. Well, that's not a good idea to break stuff. Actually, it is. We're going to break it. But what happens is that if for some reason, right, I try to deploy some resources that don't work, because we exist within the bounds of monitoring as code now, Checkly will let us know that there's something missing about what our setup is, or your setup does not work. I would say that the upper bounds are what no longer works with your monitoring as code tool, right? I think there's a limit to configurability and composability. We're using TypeScript, JavaScript here, right? So, you can 7 equals vanilla, that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean that I think that's the real limitation, right? If you're working with a mature tool where you have access to this really great way of creating resources, you're still going to encounter some boundaries, because boundaries need to be there, because we're using JavaScript and TypeScript and you can't go crazy. Sorry, Chris, that's my answer to your question.
No, it's good. It's good. I've often run into the boundary of TypeScript and JavaScript, so it's nice. Cool. Is there any? If anyone's got any questions, remember you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat, even if you want, really. Any questions about what you just seen? Otherwise, I'm just gonna take over the screen share, and I will do this. That one's my bad. I hit the wrong button.
Back on.
Yeah. And then I want to hit this. So this will. I've zoomed in on the screen. I remember last time the resolution wasn't great. Is this visible for everybody? Can everyone read this okay?
This looks really good.
Good? Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
This isn't Coralogix, this is Checkly. It's beautiful. Look at this guy. I love it. So what you'll see here is this is actually a Coralogix account. We've got a bunch of tests running against a bunch of different APIs. You can see here that we run against the Coralogix website. Now, what I talked about was the composability of your tools, but really what that means is the composability of the data. How do I join together all of these different things to create a different experience and hopefully create a unique experience by bringing together multiple data sources that wouldn't normally be joined up. So this is one way of viewing the data. Another way of viewing the data is by ingesting it into Coralogix, because we have an integration between Coralogix and Checkly. And then you can visualize a bunch of different information. So we can see here, for example, there's been 39 failed alerts and 38 recovered alerts. So what that means is that 39 checks have failed and 38 of those have recovered, which means it was a glitch, it failed, maybe it failed, and then the engineers released a new version, whatever. Instantly, we can see that the number on the left is higher than this number on the right. Therefore, something is wrong. We have a failed alert there. Now, this is all just synthetics data. Here we can see when those alarms have actually failed and recovered. So we can see here, they generally come in these pairs here because it gives you an idea that one's failed and it recovers straight away. So this is the pattern that we're seeing. This alone is Checkly data, right? Why don't I just use the Checkly UI for that? Way nicer than just those two widgets. Well, the reason why is because now I'm in Coralogix, I can also marry it up with things like backend traces. So I could say, for example, okay, so I've just seen that this is failing. There's some synthetic, one of the synthetic tests are failing for my application. So, okay, what's going on in my system right now? Well, very recently, I've just seen a massive spike in HTTP data and in HTTP latency. Okay, so the load generator application has just started to go way up, but also we can see the checkout service is high as well. Everything has just suddenly started climbing, and there was a downtail there. It's like, okay, that's interesting. And there's a spike in 500 error codes right there. So we can see right here that 500 have spiked at about the same time. We can see the green line that we use here that appear on both the widgets. That'll tell you where you are in time. You go to the spike here, you can see a spike in latency. So what we've done here is we've correlated synthetic monitoring data, which is essentially how is the user experiencing our website, with backend data. This would normally be held in multiple different systems, but with composability, we get access to a whole different kind of view where we can correlate by just scrolling down. I haven't clicked anything here. I'm just scrolling down as I go. And interestingly, at the same time, I'm saying, okay, what else has happened in my system? Well, my database query latency has gone up at the same time. So around about here, the database spikes, and all of a sudden, everything else spikes and errors spike as well. So just with a few widgets on a dashboard, I've got the user's experience, the HTTP latency of my system, the error rate, and the speed of my database all in one dashboard. Normally, you would have most of these things without the Checkly information, or you'd have the Checkly information on its own. But by integrating your tools together, you create this really powerful full stack experience where you have a single dashboard that's telling you everything that both the customer is experiencing and key metrics for your internal system. So it's not just about what's happening, it gives you context, it tells you why it's happening. I'll give you another quick example here. So I'm querying for data here. I've taken the last 7 days of checks that have run in Checkly. We have 700 of them. Okay, that's a lot of information. Again, in Checkly, you can analyze this data a bunch of different ways. This is just another alternative. In Coralogix, we have a way of clustering together multiple logs, which is how Checkly data is interpreted in Coralogix, into templates. And templates are essentially breakdowns of using machine learning. It actually clusters together similar log documents. So we can see here that actually 25% of these checks, or 24.7% of these checks, are this type of alert failure. So half are actually made up by 2 of these here, and the rest are down here. So you can see here that the test for the Coralogix website has failed, and we can see that that's come from Ireland. The next one is the Google website, and that's come from Frankfurt. I can then click on one of these values, for example, here, and I can actually monitor the occurrence of what's going on. So normally this is actually a very low amount. We're seeing all these weird spikes. So now we're varying away from the normal flow. If we click on a country, we can see that these tests typically run from Ireland and from North Virginia. Again, these are the locations where the tests are failing from. So, okay, that's pretty interesting. So again, we're just using multiple tools here to analyze the same data to give us different insights. Another good example here is what we call Coralogix flow alerts. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking multiple different things. I have tracing data here. I have spike in error volume. This is actually driven by Checkly data, this particular alarm, and this spike in Lambda function errors here. So any of these things can happen, and then within 10 minutes, either a 1% breach of our 1% SLO error rate, or 100 unique carts failed to purchase, as in customers tried to buy stuff and they couldn't, that should trigger a general alarm. So again, what we're doing here is we're taking data from disparate platforms, joining them together into a single cohesive journey. What all these things have in common is that what we're doing is we're taking data that wouldn't normally sit together, and by bringing it together, we get a whole new insight. So rather than asking questions of backend data like saying, are our latency spiking? We can say, are our users seeing errors? Yes. What if within 10 minutes our users see errors and then we breach or we have 100 unique cart failures? We know there is some serious relationship between the front end errors that the user was experiencing and these cart purchase failures. So that bakes context that makes the root cause right into the alarm, which is a cool feature. But when you bring the Checkly data in, the context and the root cause is exactly what the customer was experiencing at the time they were experiencing it. And you can decorate this with backlinks to the Checkly dashboard as well. That interoperability between tools will minimize drift. It will maximize adoption because people will naturally use both of those tools because they're just so nice to use together. So whenever you're selecting tools, whenever you're working with these different vendors, have a look at how composable those tools themselves are. Have a look at how extensible the interfaces are so that you can connect things together to create completely unique experiences at the intersection of the two data sets, not just treating them all as separate silos. Silos will always trigger drift, almost always will cause drift. So by joining your data together, having joined up data, will push better adoption, minimize drift, and you'll get maximize the value of what you're paying for your license. You get way more than the individual pieces. So I'll finish by saying what I said at the start, which is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. When you join together multiple tools like this, you get a much different experience. It's much richer, and your ability to dive into the root cause of issues is much, much more refined.
Yeah, I just absolutely love this, right? I think when we look at something like this and you think about, right, that Gestalt principle of the sum being greater than the whole of its parts, right? Like the fact that Coralogix can do this sort of really amazing work, and then, Checkly can focus on synthetic monitoring and developing new features there that are cutting edge. That sort of differentiation in approaches of tools, I think, ends up with users having a much greater experience than if you have some sort of monolithic service provider that, hey, we kind of also do this thing. Feel free to use it. Hopefully it's good. It's probably not great. Just going to put that out there. But, I think when we're talking about monitoring as code, when we're talking about all these solutions coming together and working together in this really dynamic way, this is exactly what you want to see, right? This is exactly the outcome of this new way of doing things that I think, how can I say, companies like ours are at the forefront of. And the folks that have been on all three of these webinar series, I just want to say, you guys are at the forefront, right? The fact that you're here learning about this stuff, talking about this stuff, we're at the edge of something really cool and amazing within our industry, and this is great. I think this is awesome. Thanks for showing us this, Chris.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Let me jump back to the slides quickly. I think I can do this and then do this, and you should see slide magic and my dog behind me as well.
Slide magic.
Yeah. And just excuse the background noise. Jonathan, can you take over, please, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so let's answer some questions, right? Maybe we've answered all of them. If that's the case, it's really cool. I highly doubt it. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'll ask myself some questions like how did these tools get to be so good? I'm just kidding. It looks like we're not having that many questions come in right now. We'll probably give it one more minute just to see if anyone asks anything. But it's been a real pleasure doing this. I think as we've gone down this journey of discovery together about monitoring as code and covering all these topics, what really sticks out to me is how we've really focused on what's practical and attainable for organizations, and that being something that's very important, right? Monitoring as code, while it is something that, I think the industry is moving towards, it doesn't have to be something that's daunting. In fact, it's probably much easier to adopt and to use than other solutions today that folks are currently using.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the message that you guys should definitely take away is monitoring as code is cutting edge. It's brand new. Like, but by adopting it, you only gain benefits. We're not talking about like radical changes to your entire workflow or anything. All we're doing is saying, let's bring this other thing that you've already got into your existing workflow. And let's make it work the same way that everything else works. Let's make it scalable. Let's make it more consistent. Solving that problem now means fewer headaches tomorrow. That's the goal of most DevOps practices, anyway. I think we have a question there, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, let me see. I'm going to get access to the recordings of these sessions. If you've signed up for these webinars and you're here, we'll be sending you an email with the session that you have attended. Chris, do you know if we're going to send a packet of all of the webinars and all of the resources that we've shared so far?
I don't see why we can't. We definitely can.
Yeah, happy holidays, right? We're going to make sure you guys have access to 3 full hours of Chris and I making fun of each other, talking about monitoring as code. So, Corinne Veer, hopefully that's the answer you wanted here.
Yeah, maybe it was like, can we burn these recordings? Can we get rid of them?
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
Oh,
you're very welcome. That's just Corinne Veer saying thanks. Apparently, he didn't tell us whether or not he wanted to burn the webinars, but he did say thanks.
No,
so.
he remained ambiguous. I respect that. Cool. Well,
very nice.
Thank you very much, everybody everyone who attended all three, the second one, this one. Not really important. Thank you so much for coming along. And if after you've reviewed the material and stuff, you think of any other topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know. We're more than happy to make more of these webinar series because it's been great fun this time around. So thank you very, very much, everybody. Really appreciate that. And look forward to seeing you in the next series.
Absolutely. Catch you later, Chris. Catch you later, everyone. Bye.